Is it about you and how cool you look, or is it about getting a desired result? And if it's about getting a desired result, then you really want to think about what are the things underlying the problems you face, right? You can go beat up a bunch of people who do stuff that you don't like. I don't know how effective that is in actually stopping or changing violent crime, right? You want to look at what are the root causes, what's going on with poverty, what's going on with disadvantage. And that's where I do like the Batman story, because one thing that's not explored as often, but you see it, little glimpses of it in Young Justice or other places like that, is Bruce Wayne. He actually funds, research for things like medicines and global warming and things like poverty and inequality and things like that. There are some storylines where his corporation is just actually kind of bad, and then there are storylines where his corporation is doing these good things in the world. That two-pronged approach of I have a mission that I do on the daily grind to try to deal with, he does his everyday, punching bad guys thing, but he's also trying to address the actual long-term issues that create those situations. That's a much more intelligent narrative for how we really work in real life, because in real life, you're not going to solve problems by punching them. Actually, for the most part, you have to have a slightly bigger picture thought process to get to the root of the issue. You could be a search and rescue person who goes to disaster areas regularly, and at the same time be thinking about and funding research for how we can prevent pollution, climate change, other kinds of things that help to worsen disasters, especially weather disasters and so forth. If your focus in life is to go be law enforcement and go beat up people, then the other prong is how are you solving the underlying problems of poverty? So trying to think about a two-pronged approach to what you do, and having some kind of intelligent underlying change. And do you need a costume for that? If you're operating in an urban environment, you really want to help people. If your focus is I'd like to go out and help homeless people, I think it's not really appropriate. It can be a little bit self-aggrandizing, come around with your cape and fancy things, besides the homeless people. So it you got to think about what's practical really for your situation. And I think that's where, when we talk about becoming a real life superhero, I get real practical about it. What are you actually going to accomplish? Something to think about. Yeah, exactly. Treat not only the symptoms, but the disease. I think that's a really great way to put it. There are situations, if you're working with children, if your goal is to work with abused children and stuff like that, costumes obviously would be a huge benefit. I think one of the most rewarding things that ever happened in my life was as a teenager in Paraguay. Actually, I did this on multiple occasions where I dressed as a clown. So if you're working with kids, I can see costumes being particularly useful and even very deeply meaningful, especially giving costumes to kids, letting them feel strong and heroic. I can see how if you are a sexual assault victim, using a costume to give you a sense of power could also be beneficial, depending on what it is you're doing. The real concept of, things like trying to prevent sexual assault, you look at culturally, how do we do that? And then if you look at okay, so how could somebody who's trained in martial arts actually prevent that? Well, a big thing is if you control the bars and just be watching for vulnerable people who are being let off when they're clearly not able to consent, you can step in and try to make a difference there, because if somebody can't consent and they're clearly very dazed or dipsy and someone is taking them off somewhere by themselves, that's a concern. But you're not going to go in and just punch people. You're going to observe, and you wouldn't be wearing a costume in that situation, because first off, you would want to be able to be a witness if you needed to report something to the police, and then also secondly, you would want to not look like a douchebag hanging out at the bar in your Batman costume or whatever. You want to blend in when you're doing what you're doing, unless you're doing the real Batman thing where you're stalking people in the dark based on things you've heard on the police scanner, and then we're getting into issues of legality and stuff like that. And depending on your country, sometimes it's good to do things that are not legal, but I am not going to advocate that you do that. Because you could also die and go to jail and bad stuff can happen to you. So if you're going to do something that is not legal, you need to think long and hard about whether or not it has payoff, or whether or not you just want to be, big tough boy man and punch stuff, right? Yeah, I love that, what you said. Just an armband with a red cross can be enough sometime. Although in certain settings that'll get you killed. Actually, in Afghanistan, medics very quickly stopped wearing, this is, back in 2001, 2002, medics stopped wearing things that identify them as medics, because the Taliban and other terrorists would identify you as somebody who is they would immediately identify you as someone who needs to be killed, so that it weakens the force. So there are a lot of situations, and then also people would, high-ranking officers in the military, in a lot of Middle Eastern settings, will actually switch their insignia with lower-ranking people, so that you can't, and you don't salute them either. Saluting in those zones is called a sniper check. Because if you salute somebody in a war area, you are telling a sniper who might be watching, this is an important person, and therefore getting them killed. So it's called a sniper check. So you want to think practically about, like all these things about like respect and honor and things that like go into a costume and identity. You want to think about not having those as much. On the other hand, the uniform is very important to people in areas where the American military has done a lot of humanitarian work. The uniform is important because it says, here come the people who are going to help you. And that's why we are hit on the head all the time in the military with uniform protocol and behavior when you're in uniform, right? When I was in Korea, I would have, I very quickly learned I should not carry, I only had one backpack, and that was my assault pack. Very quickly learned I shouldn't really carry that out and about, because people would immediately identify me as American military, and older folks would want to take pictures with me because of their experiences with the Korean War and how important the American military was to them. And that's obviously to me, that was a huge, like, whoa, I didn't participate in that. I'm not part of that honor that you want. I think also I'm like twice the size of all these people. I'm like a giant. So I was like this giant woman with my military backpack. I think to them that was really interesting. And so, it's kind of like I'm a tourist attraction in their country. And so people wanted to take pictures with me, and there's this concept of stolen valor. You want to be careful not to be taking, in the military especially, taking credit for something that's not yours. And it's kind of like, it felt very uncomfortable, because it's like, I didn't participate in that. That was other people who did that to try to protect you. So uniform and costume and all these different kinds of things make a difference in how you, they can be useful symbols depending on where you are in the world. They can be negative symbols, right? We were taught about like how you bear yourself in these uniforms makes a really big difference, because it changes how people think about the world, and it changes national security, really. Your behavior, a soldier who behaves poorly in uniform, like the monsters at Abu Ghraib did more to destroy national security in some ways than the Taliban did. Because if you change how people view you, you then change whether or not they want to attack you, right? There's a reason that in Korea, BTS's military service keeps getting pushed back, because what they do is considered a service for national security. Because everyone in the world knows where Korea is and values Korea because of this band, right? Because this K-pop band. Because, if somebody were to, this is an unfortunate truth, right? If somebody were to come in and like massacre Liberia, there wouldn't be a lot of sounds about it, right? On the world stage, other countries don't care as much. If people were to railroad over South Korea, there would be noise because of 7, little dancing boys that everybody loves, right? That's a disparaging way to put it. They're adults. They're all like younger than me. So, but, so South Korea's government has considered them a form of national security. So how you present yourself, what you wear, what you look like, people shouldn't judge you based on that, but you can use it as a weapon to accomplish your goals. And so I think when you're thinking about things like costume, uniform, these are all things to be thinking about. Did you guys ever used to like fantasize and draw yourselves as superheroes when you were kids?